The Far Quest, The Chronicles of Cursoon, Book 1, by R. Jason Lynch. Chapter 29, The Village of Mudbrick. Late in the day, Livid and Jaunty came to stand upon the brow of a hill that overlooked the village of Mudbrick. The small town's narrow wall was set around it in a great ring, and though it was only about 5 feet tall, it served Mudbrick's needs well enough, for its sole purpose was to keep out wild beasts. The wall was made of simple mud bricks, but they could not be seen, for they were overlaid with plaster and painted white. This clean surface served as a vast canvas, upon which the people of the village painted bands of brightly colored geometric shapes. Within the protection of the wall, there were a great number of round houses huddled together. These huts had grayish-yellow thatched roofs, and wisps of smoke drifted into the air from clay chimneys that poked up through their thatch. Like the village's ring of wall, its houses were also made with mud bricks, but they too were plastered over and painted white. The same brightly colored geometric patterns were used to decorate each of the huts with a wide encircling band. Moreover, these shapes bordered their doors and delineated their windows. A single towering tree stood in the middle of the village. When seen from a great distance, it looked much like a giant mushroom with a huge green cap. However, when closer, one could see that it was actually a massive tree. Its gnarled trunk was covered with smooth, pale gray bark. Its leaves were long and sharp, like 1,000 green swords thrust upwards toward the clear blue sky, and its many limbs cast an enormous shadow over the town's small well like a giant, living parasol. Even the tree was decorated with brightly colored geometric shapes. These were painted in a broad band around the tree's base so that it matched well with the rest of the village. Against the far side of the ring of wall, the largest house in Mudbrick was set apart from the other homes. It was nearly triple the size of the other dwellings, and its roof was covered in red clay tiles instead of thatch. However, it was like the others in that its walls were also plastered, painted white, and decorated with brightly colored designs. On the right side of the great house, there were pens to hold animals. These were made from dried gray wood, and they stood open and empty, for they waited to receive Livid's flock. On the left side, there was another building that matched all the others. This was the stable, and it too had a tiled roof, for this was where the master of the village kept his prized horses. Some of these pampered animals looked out from their stalls while the overhang of the roof kept them out of the sun. These beautiful horses were snow white, with flowing white manes, and as if to make them fit in with the overall pattern of the village, their bridles and saddles were covered in brightly colored geometric shapes. As Livid and Jaunty led her flock down to the town's narrow gate, an old man sitting on a stool looked up at the sound of the approaching sheep. His seat was so low that his bony knees were almost even with his chest. He draped his weathered arms over his knees while an ornately carved wooden cudgel lay beside him just within reach. His closely cropped hair and beard were as white as snow, while his leathery skin was a very dark, reddish brown. There were no shoes upon his heavily calloused feet, and he wore a long, dingy white robe that matched the town's wall, for it was decorated with the same colorful geometric shapes upon the borders of its sleeves, around its collar, and along its hem. Moreover, many colorful clay beads hung around his neck and wrists. The old man was little more than a skeleton, and while he was too aged and frail to do any strenuous labor, his sharp cinnamon-colored eyes were able to keep watch at the gate. Though they were of no close relation, the old man looked like he could have been Jaunty's grandfather.
"Peace to you, Olden,"
the pair said as they came to stand before the ancient guard.
"You're late,"
the old man remarked with a toothless smirk.
"Master expected you 2 days ago."
Jaunty shrugged.
"I had a little trouble finding her."
"Well, little man, we were starting to worry you'd been eaten by a lion or something."
Olden replied with a chuckle.
"Oh, One did try to eat me, but I killed him first.
The boy lied while acting like he was slinging a stone.
Right.
Olden drew out the word while rolling his eyes.
Just like the time you beat a dragon in a game of riddles?
It was a young dragon.
The boy protested irritably.
He hadn't learned very much yet.
You should be a bard. You're good at telling stories.
Olden declared while laughing. Then, before the boy could make a reply, the elderly guard turned to Livid and said,
I'll announce your arrival.
With that, the old man took out a small ram's horn. After wetting his dry lips, he put them to the instrument and sounded a series of musical notes. Jaunty glowered at Olden. Though he did not really expect him to believe his claim of killing a lion, he did not appreciate the old man's blatant skepticism. Seeing the boy opening his mouth to give a retort, Livid interrupted him by quickly coaxing him through the open gate before he could formulate a cutting reply.
Thank you, Olden.
She forced a smile, while still gently pushing Jaunty ahead of her. As they started down the narrow street that snaked its way between the many round huts, Olden's chuckle could still be heard in the growing distance.
Old dog.
Jaunty growled to himself as he stomped angrily beside the gray shepherdess.
I could kill a lion. It wouldn't be that hard, and I'm smart enough to outwit a dragon too.
Livid smiled and ruffled the boy's cottony rust-brown hair.
I know you are.
At the hearing of her words, his aggravation melted away, and he flashed his gapped smile up at her.
It's sure good having you home.
The shepherdess only nodded while fighting the frown that struggled to come onto her gray face. As they walked down the meandering path that snaked through the houses, they passed more than a few women sweeping dirt from their homes. Others were carrying large water pots balanced upon their heads. More than a few of these carried babies in cloth slings that hung from their brown shoulders. There were also small children playing between the houses, and they waved cheerfully to Jaunty and Livid as they passed with their flock. While these women and children were of varying ages and sizes, they were all similar to Jaunty in that they had dark, reddish-brown skin, rusty brown wool-like hair, and bright, cinnamon-colored eyes. Because of this, Livid's total lack of color stood out in sharp contrast. At last, they came to the holding pens. After the gray shepherdess guided her sheep inside one of the enclosures, she gently shut its gate. The whole flock bleated fearfully, and she tried to comfort them, but to no avail.
I hate the shearing time.
Livid grumbled quietly to herself.
What took you so long?
A deep, booming voice suddenly called out. With a start, Livid turned from petting one of the lambs and found a large man standing over her. He was a plump, jolly-looking fellow with the same rich brown skin and cinnamon-colored eyes as all the other citizens of Mudbrick. His smile shone brightly within his gray beard, and the hair of his head was pulled back in many braided locks. The shepherdess frowned.
You sent for us early.
When you didn't come, I started to fear something had happened to you.
He said with his hands upon his hips.
Master,
Jaunty stepped forward.
the truth is, I had a little trouble finding her.
Jokund raised a bushy gray eyebrow.
Didn't I tell you to wait for her at Sweetwater?
The boy opened his mouth, but no words came out. Seeing this, Livid spoke up.
I haven't been going to that well for a while.
She explained with a shrug. A puzzled look grew upon the fat man's dark face.
Where else would you water your flock?
Livid sighed and then mumbled.
Mudpot.
Mudpot.
Jokund sputtered.
When I was still just a shepherd, I never went to that well. It used to smell like rotten eggs.
It still does.
Jaunty chuckled, but when he saw Livid glaring at him, his laugh died away.
I'm tired.
The shepherdess grumbled as she turned to go.
Come get me when the shearers are done and you tell them.
She paused, looked over her shoulder, and snarled angrily.
If I see one single scratch on my sheep, I'll put matching marks on them.
With that, she marched off. Jokund glanced down at Jaunty.
Well, she's in a good mood.
He commented with a clear tone of sarcasm. The boy shrugged.
For some reason, she doesn't like talking about Sweetwater.
The fat man frowned.
Whoever heard of a thirsty soul disliking Sweetwater?